Alright, so today I'm going to be talking about Kano as a cameo for use with Shang Tsung. Kano is, in my opinion, the optimal cameo for Shang Tsung, and there's a pretty long list of reasons, all one reason, which is Kano Ball. But I'm going to go over each of his moves, and we're going to talk about how they can be applied with Shang, what weaknesses they shore up, what strengths they enhance, and what utility they grant. So, let's dive straight in. The first big move for Kano is his eye laser. His eye laser is a mid-hitting projectile that's very active, but has a very long startup and tons of recovery frames. As you can see, it says that it's negative 35 on block here in the menu. And that's probably true. It is so negative that even at full screen, almost every single character in the game can punish it. And with a cameo, every single character in the game can punish it. Johnny Cage is the only person who has 0 full screen options by himself, and if he has Kung Lao with him, he can punish you anyway. So, we can demonstrate that Liu Kang's, I'm holding block there, reversal punish. Liu Kang's Cosmic Flame does it, and his Dragon's Tail, if he wants to approach, do it too. So this is a bad move, especially for Shang. The only redeeming quality of the move is that it's very active, because with 22 active frames, something like that, anybody who jumps and comes down without actually hitting you is going to get caught by Kano Laser. The problem is, Shang can already do this. This move is pretty active. This move is very active, and this move is one of the most active projectiles in the game. If anybody is jumping, we have a better option to fire. And it's less negative. It is not punishable from full screen by anybody because these are actually plus on block at this distance. So there's really just like no reason to fire a Kano laser as Shang Tsung. Unless you really just believe your opponent is going to try to neutral crouch. And even then, Kano Ball is a mid. So why are we firing the laser? So Kano Laser is a move that only comes out on accident. That's my overwhelming experience with it. The next move in his roster, the last thing about Kano Eye Laser actually is that it says it has invulnerability when performed as a get up. Let's examine whether or not that's really true. So we got Liu Kang programmed to give us a very normal mid after getting blocked. Nope. Did it with the correct timing, did it as a get up, should have had invulnerability. It just doesn't. Maybe it does on some weird frame somewhere, but this is basically a completely useless function of the move. In addition to being death on block like all invulnerable get-ups are, this also isn't invulnerable and gets hit straight out of it by even the simplest meaty. So never touch Eye Laser. That's the moral of the story. The next move in his roster is Knife Toss. Knife Toss is 2 projectiles, and it has some problems. The biggest problem that Knife Toss has is that you can see Liu Kang is blocking low. Normally, that means he blocks high projectiles. So if he sits there and blocks, he keeps taking the chip damage from my skulls. Kano knives, a little bit less so. The first knife will whiff on people who are crouching, even if they're blocking. So this is not something that you can use to just toss out there at the end of strings to make yourself plus, even though it is an ambush, which is a fantastic quality for a cameo to have. I can keep operating my character while he does that, which means it could generate plus frames in theory, but it doesn't end up really being able to do that because most people block crouching against Shang Tsung. So the first knife whiffs, and then they jab out of the second knife. And while they're jabbing, they're not going to get hit by it because they're crouching. So It's not great for generating plus frames, particularly for Shang. For other characters, it can work if your character has a move that has a long animation and forces your opponent to stand while they're blocking. Then you can use Kano Knife to generate plus frames, and it does generate a lot of them. Its block advantage is 90, so that's one of the highest in the game, probably. So even when you take the recovery frames that your character has from their move out of that 9U, you almost always have a massive amount of plus frames. The other applications for knives are armor breaks, which are something that we will demonstrate in the corner. Yep, this is the right spot for that. He's going to do his Enhanced Dancing Dragon, his armored move, when he wakes up. Or maybe he won't. Hold on. Now, this is not the greatest solution to armor. It beats some people. It doesn't beat Liu Kang because of Liu Kang's... Yeah, if you have the spacing right, you can beat Liu Kang with it. But much of the time, because Liu Kang moves forward, it just... the second knife whiffs. But if you combine it with Shang's own moves, you're going to get armor breaks very consistently. If you use it on other characters, it's a little bit better. People like Raiden, who stands up for his electric fly, is almost guaranteed to get hit out of it by Kano knives. Unfortunately, Kano Ball also can be used to do the same thing by just combining it with one of Shang's moves. So Kano knives is not usually the ideal armor break, but it can be used that way, especially if your spacing is just right. Stand over here and say, nah. And it is a safe way to do it. So if you want to be able to block just in case you're not confident in your timing or you're worried they're going to delay instead of armor or something like that, you can toss Kano knives, hold block, and then if they armor, it gets broken, and if they delay wake up or something like that, no harm, no foul. Because you don't have to use Shang to do a meaty at the same time. And I think that about covers the uses of Kano knives outside of a combo. So the real application of Kano knives for Shang, and the real thing that it's doing for Shang in particular, is that it opens up form stealer combos for us. We can do something like this. Not like that. Yeah, something like that. And this is applicable with every character. You can use the same route where you go into a second ground skull like that, form steal, and then do your character's specific combo from there. Some characters get wild damage off of this. Smoke can get up to 48% if you're willing to spend all your meter. Scorpion can do 53 if you're willing to fire his fatal blow. Lots of characters can do a ton of damage. Omni-Man meterless can do like 43%, something like that. So this opens up a whole new world of utility for Shang. Being able to form steal mid-combo means that you can often get the ideal Oki situation once you're done with your combo for your opponent's character, because most characters will leave you at a position that is ideal for themselves at the end of the combo. There are a few exceptions. Liu Kang doesn't leave you at the most ideal position, although he leaves you in an okay position for himself. Kung Lao leaves you at a really bad position for himself if you end with Shaolin Shimmy. He'll chuck you almost full screen, and he hates being full screen. But people like Shang When Shang ends a combo, he ends it with this move and sends you full screen, and he'll put you at the ideal distance. People like Omni-Man, he'll leave you point blank with himself after he drops the boots on you from the air. So you're going to go into your opponent's combo ender, which is going to give you an ideal Oki situation for your opponent, and you're going to be able to get your EX Form Stealer without using injection. So you can get your damage buff without spending 2 bars, and you can do it safely. Most in other scenarios, you're trying to think of like a block string where you transform on block, and then you don't have guaranteed damage coming out of it, and you don't have Oki pressure with your opponent's character, which means that you've just transformed into a character that you don't play, and that your opponent plays a ton of, and you're hoping that you're somehow going to be better with that character than your opponent, which is just super unlikely. Even if you have way more playtime than your opponent, odds are good that you dedicated enough time to learn how to play Shang effectively in order to do this, so you're not going to be very good at playing their character. I mean, I have more than 500 hours in this game, and there are probably 2 characters I can play at a level where I would feel comfortable just being them the whole match when I'm actually playing Shang, other than Shang himself. So the fact that you can actually finish the combo as their character is a very big deal. And if you don't like playing as their character, but you get optimal damage by turning into them, which is something that's true of very few characters, only like Scorpion and Omni-Man, maybe 1 or 2 others are actually optimizing their damage by transforming. Usually you do less damage in a transformation combo than you would with Shang without spending any meter or cameo, actually, because Shang has very good combo damage. Shang does about 38% off of his normal B&B with his best starter. Transforming mid-combo usually reduces that, even if you enhance the transformation. But there are a few occasions where it really is optimal, and Kano opens up the ability to use that freely, and then at the end of the combo you can just switch back into Shang if you don't feel comfortable playing your opponent's character. The extensions off of Kano knives really only apply to Form Stealer routes for Shang. You do not want the extra gravity scaling and damage scaling that the knives bring you in most combo routes if you're doing it solo. So you're never going to fire Kano knives instead of a ground skull. They have worse damage scaling, they have worse gravity scaling. And speaking of their scaling, if you can manage to make one Kano knife, the first Kano knife, with your opponent as they're falling down, and the second one catch them, you will deal more damage universally, and you will have better gravity scaling. So there are some characters that their combo routes, their best combo routes, only work if a single knife hits and the first one whiffs. Smoke, for instance, you cannot use his best combo routes unless the first knife whiffs. Li Mei has the same problem. They still have some combo route if both knives hit, but they don't have a good one. Kitana has no combo route unless the first knife whiffs and only the second one hits. So it's worth keeping in mind that if you can time it perfectly to make that first Kano knife whiff while you're doing this, just like that, then you are going to get the optimal routes possible for your character, for the character you're stealing. And it'll just deal more damage even if you use the exact same route, and it'll be easier to do. You won't have to dash up to them during the combo. You can just stay where you are because the second knife will leave them right on top of you. So that's a nitty-gritty detail about how to use Kano knives in the combo, but it does matter. And if you watch my Form Stealer guide that I have on my channel, it's all uses of Form Stealer with Kano as the extension tool, because I think Kano is Shang's optimal cameo. And some of those routes really do require that only one knife hits. And then the final thing that we're going to talk about, the final move Kano has, is his ball. Kano Ball is legendary. This is just one of the best moves in the game. It's fantastic. It does everything that Shang wants it to do in particular. And it's great for other characters too. If you want to create block strings with any character, Kano Ball can do it. So when you transform into your opponent, know that there is almost always a way to create a very real and reasonably high chip damage block string using Kano Ball. Some characters don't really have access to high chip damage specials, and that's okay. You can still make block pressure with Kano Ball, you just can't make chip damage. Shang, however, can make chip damage, and he can make frame traps. At point blank, he can make his block pressure. He can use the mix-ups, the very limited mix-ups that he has access to, thanks to Kano. And he can actually create frame traps from full screen, thanks to his ground skull, and the fact that Kano Ball is a mid instead of a high. In addition to that, he can crush enemy projectiles, or projectile immunity rather, and enemy projectiles. If an enemy has a crushing projectile, Kano can eat it, and then your projectiles will go and punish your opponent because Kano was in front of them. If they use Ice Coat, Kano doesn't count as a projectile, and it hits them anyway. If they use Motaro Reflect, again, Kano doesn't count as a projectile, and it hits Motaro. If they use Kenshi's Charge, Kano will knock him back to full screen for doing that. And like I said, you can combine it with Shang's meaties to break armor in the corner. And it's very reliable at doing that if you are meatying properly. The thing you're worried about is a delayed wake up, but Kano Ball can actually be delayed. So if you are worried your opponent's going to delay wake up, you really do have a very clean option to break armor anyway as they stand up, or to use make sure Kano Ball hits anyway as they stand up. It also makes your zoning better if you follow up your skulls with Kano Ball. So we're going to go over all of these actual functions right now. And the first one that's easy to go over is Kano Ball at full screen. Yeah, 50 damage, not super impressive, but it does knock them down, give you a bunch of hit advantage. Combine it with your skulls. Now you did almost 15% off of getting hit by one projectile. But that's not really why we do Kano Ball. This is a nice perk to firing Kano Ball with our projectiles, but the real reason we do it is for frame advantage. Right there. It says there our block advantage is 9. If we space Kano Ball just a little bit further back from our projectiles, we get even more plus frames. Kano is a mid, so they have to block him. And in order to block him, they basically have to block the third skull of my skull barrage as well, which means they're going to take a lot of chip damage. So we're going to program him to crouch, block all. Now he's taking at least this 16 damage from that chip, but if he actually chooses to block the whole thing in an attempt to be as safe as possible against this move and not get called out by Kano by just crouching, he takes about 60 chip damage. Doing that a couple of times is pretty... It matters. It makes a big difference in the health of your opponent over the course of a match. It makes your zoning a lot more effective when your opponent actually has to hold it. And Kano Ball, being a mid, makes sure they actually have to hold it. They cannot just crouch my projectiles. And I don't have to EX them and spend my meter in order to try to get mids. And actually at full screen, Shang's EX does not hit as a mid either. So Kano is perfect to enhance this. The other thing that Kano Ball does for this is because of those plus frames, we've just made a frame trap by turning into Old Shang and using Ground Skull. So our opponent blocks Kano because they have to, and then if they try to do anything else, here comes Ground Skull to make you regret it. And if you get hit by Ground Skull, we hit confirm into a full combo. Which sends you back to full screen yet again. So, making a frame trap and block pressure from full screen is something that Shang is uniquely good at doing with Kano. It's something that like Quan Chi could also do, but Quan Chi has other zoning strategies, he does not tend to full combo you from full screen the way that Shang wants to. So it's a little less powerful for him to be able to create that block pressure. So this is something that most players don't see coming in a lot of ways. Also, if they get hit by Kano, they get knocked down, and we get the opportunity to melee them with the ground skull. So combining Kano with your zoning is really, really powerful. It enhances something that Shang is already very good at and makes him almost unstoppable. Somebody like Sub-Zero gives the ice coat, and we're worried about that. It really impedes a big part of our game plan. So we're going to have him do it, and then we're going to show you that Kano just goes straight through the ice coat. There is nothing that the Liu Kang player can do about the triple skull barrage accompanied by Kano. Normally, he would be like, oh yeah, I put on the ice coat, I'm not worried. Nope. If you try to dash forward through my projectiles with Kano, you're going to get hit. And the worst part is that if you get hit by Kano, you are going to end up back to full screen. So just like that, I literally can't walk back any further than Kano pushed my opponent. So you're actually full screen again. We start all over again. We're back into zoning, which is exactly where we want to be. And if they use their Sub-Zero cameo, they're short a cameo charge, and they took a bunch of damage and ended up full screen. We're also short a cameo charge, but we ended up in our ideal position. Another thing that Liu Kang can do, and that several other characters can do, is they have a crushing projectile. So that's what happens if they use their crushing projectile. I try to fire my projectile, and theirs just eats all of mine and hits me anyway. For a pretty hefty sum, too. 120 damage is no slouch. But if I do Kano, then we get Kano taking the projectile. The projectile disappears once it collides with Kano. And Kano only takes 20 damage, where I would take, even on chip, I take 25. So Kano takes less than chip damage, and then my projectiles continue to go through, and my opponents don't. And you see, if you time it right, you can actually get a punish. Because if Kano is in front of my projectiles, then my opponent doesn't have a way to use their crushing projectile to beat my projectiles. My projectiles will be behind Kano. Kano gets hit, the crushing projectile disappears, my projectiles go through. And if it's timed properly, your opponent gets punished. Now, with something like the Ice Coat or the Motaro Reflect, your opponent will not get punished because they could block, but they are often trying to advance on you when they use these moves, so they're thinking they're going to dash through your projectiles, and then they get hit by Kano. After getting hit by Kano once or twice, they're going to realize that they have to block here. But them having to block there is good for you anyway. It's a ton of plus frames, and gives you the opportunity to advance if that's what you want to do, or to fire more projectiles, because Ice Coat can only eat 5 before it disappears. And if you triple barrage twice, then they've taken 6 projectiles. So if I do this, Ice Coat's going to crack. And Kano Ball is not just good for this at full screen. Kano Ball is good for this at every distance. So, if we want to create block strings as Shang Tsung, which is something that we don't have, it's something that we normally have to give up our turn every time our opponent blocks our strings. But no longer. We can do high chip damage block strings with Kano. Something like that. And you are so plus after the Kano Ball that you will jail into your mid, which is 13 frames. So, you'll frame trap, rather, not jail. Right there. We had 12 frames of block advantage. We have a 13 frame move. We can get as many as, like, 20 frames of block advantage. Eventually, the display stops showing you how much you have, because it's not computing this as a true block string with the Kano ball. But the later your Kano ball hits, the more block advantage you have. If it's too late, your opponent could jab between the spikes hitting and Kano hitting, and he would punish you and knock Kano out. So he could actually get a full combo punish if he knew. However, if you normally time it properly, your opponent won't be able to jab out. So they'll get punished and hit by Kano if they try to jab out. And getting hit by Kano once or twice is enough to stop trying to jab there. Then if they try to jab after Kano, they're in an even worse position, because Kano gave me even more plus frames. The other thing we can do with these block strings is integrate Shang's own mix-ups into the game now. Now, normally, Shang's mix-ups, this overhead, is not very impressive. It's 23 frames. It's only -4 on block, but if it gets up-blocked, it is punishable. -19, yeah, absolutely brutal. So, we don't like to use this move very much. The only nice thing about it is that it has decent reach. Shang is not a character who has big buttons most of the time, and this is one of his bigger buttons. In his old form, forward 3 is instead a low. And this low has good reach, about round start. Yeah, pretty close to round start. And this low starts combos. And because of that, the low is also only 19 frames, so it is probably not even quite reactable for most people, especially online. Where the overhead being 23 frames is reactable, people have trouble reacting to it because of the visual noise that'll be on screen when we actually try to do it. But it is reactable, and if people start up-blocking it, you're going to be very upset that you tried it. Once they demonstrate that they know that up-blocking that makes it punishable, you should never try it again. But we can do a block string like this. To get an overhead. We can do a block string like this. To get a low. And we can do a block string for chip damage, where we get a mid, and we can end safely with an all-mid string as Young Shang. We also have other options with some different attempts at mix-ups, like we do this, where we end with the low spikes. Technically, the low spikes are probably punishable by most characters at this range, but most people hesitate and don't know that I'm -28. Also, it's very common for people to get hit by the low there and not be able to punish. You could also use Kano to make yourself safe off of the spikes if you wanted. Off of the ground spikes, I mean. So, if you're willing to just completely spend the whole bag of Kano charges, and punishable, you can do nearly 22% in chip damage. And because Spinning Spikes has a lot of hits in it, we have 3 hits right there. You're almost guaranteed to chew through any meter they have when your opponent's using Last Breath. So, dying to chip damage against Shang Tsung is a very real threat with Kano on our team. And even being able to toss in this light mix-up to just up the damage even more, right? We go, okay, we just want you to eat a lot of chip, and then we're going to toss in a mix-up like that, and you might just bite it. You can also do it into a throw. Like that, and throws lead into down 3s for Shang Tsung. So, this is just a very, very good tool. You have a 3-way mix-up. They're all a little bit on the what you might call predictable side. It's a 4-way mix-up if you count the mid, because it is true that if your opponent tries to jab out of your overhead, they will beat it. And if they try to jab out of your low, if you timed it improperly, they can beat it too. So going for the mid then actually beats the jab and leads to a full combo. So you might describe it as part of the mix-up. Which means that you're in a four-way mix-up, and even if some of them are reactable, you're in. It's a tough spot. No opponent really wants to be there. The solution that universally works against them all is armor, but of course that costs a meter, doesn't deal incredible damage, and is probably going to reset the neutral for most characters, except for somebody like Kung Lao, who is just going to abuse you when you try to do something like this. But if you know that your opponents are going to armor, you can always block and defeat their mix-up that way. So this is something that Shang Tsung just normally can't do on his own and needs a cameo for, and Kano does it really, really well. And being able to do this at full screen and at point blank range means that Shang is really threatening from every distance except like round start. Round start here, this is like where Shang doesn't want to be. Up close, now we're happy. We have block pressure and we have chip damage and we have mix-ups. And far away, we have frame traps and we have chip damage and we have just regular zoning. And the Kano ball off of the triple skulls into ground skull, that is a very true frame trap. The only way they can get out of is armor, and they would need full screen armor for that to be effective. Otherwise, I could punish their armor as well after they whiff it. So characters like Sub-Zero could punish it in theory. Most Sub-Zeros aren't aware that they can punish it, or because people don't think about using armor at full screen. They don't think about getting meatied by this. When they wake up, you can always meaty them with that, and when they block Kano, you can always frame trap them with that. And most people don't think of themselves as being frame trapped when they block projectiles. But it is in fact true that right there we have 11 frames of advantage. You're not quite frame trapped with the ground skull from there because it's 19 frames. You could dash forward. So most people are doing something like that. They're trying to dash forward. But with Kano, that isn't possible anymore. And you're going to get hit if you try to dash forward. So we have a mid projectile to enforce straight skull. We have something to beat projectile immunity. We have something to beat crushing projectiles. We have a way to integrate form stealer into our combos. And we have block pressure up close, which are all things that make Shang much, much better than he seems on the surface. When used as a solo character or when used with the wrong cameo, Shang is missing all of those things. He can't beat Sub-Zero armor by himself. He can't make good block strings by himself. He can't deal chip damage by himself. He doesn't have a way to enforce his straight skulls by himself, and those are his most powerful projectiles. And he doesn't have a way to beat crushing projectiles by himself. And he can integrate Form Stealer by himself, but it is much less impressive and costs meter. And Kano gives him access to all of those things. And this basically just makes him the best cameo pick. Kano's ball delay, we can also hold it for quite a while, just like Kung Lao Hat. And we can cancel it if we want. We can say, oh, we can see that our opponent got hit by our triple skull. And go, oh, never mind, we don't need Kano. And if you cancel Kano, he starts recharging much quicker than if you fire him. If you fire Kano, you can see what happens to his recharge. It waits for him to get fully off screen and then starts recharging. But if you cancel Kano, he starts recharging the second you cancel him, like a frame or two after you cancel him. So if you see that your opponent's getting hit and you decide you'd rather have your cameo recharge faster than hit for the extra damage off of this, then you can. But being able to hit for 15% with one projectile is pretty brutal, especially if your opponent jumps and gets caught by the whole barrage. It is absolutely brutal. And you can see that even if Kano hits first, we can time it in such a way that he actually will catch all of the ground skulls as well. This can be a little bit tricky. There, in that case, Kano didn't exactly hit first, but he hit at a timing. You can change the timing so that if your opponent is ducking all 3 skulls and then blocking Kano consistently, you can say, no, you can't do that anymore. Now, if you don't block the second skull, Kano hits you, and so do the other skulls. Or if you don't block Kano, then all the skulls hit you, which is a possible timing that is just hard to nail down. And you could change it so that he's coming with the 3rd skull on the nose, so that if you have to block the 3rd skull in order to block Kano. And all of those things can just hit your opponent for extra zoning damage and get us a lot closer to the win. And with Shang's high combo damage, then 1 or 2 combos plus a Kano barrage and a throw is death. And if we have access to fatal blows, we can jump up to almost 50% on a combo. And if we have a good form steal, we can go all the way to like 53 or something like that if we're willing to mag dump someone. So, these are all the reasons that Kano is the best cameo, in my opinion, for Shang Tsung. There are other cameos that are excellent for him, like Sector and Striker. But I think Kano, the one-up that Kano has on those is that he is much better at beating projectile immunity than either of them are. Both of them actually do have options to beat projectile immunity, but their options are a big commitment. Whereas with Kano, you're actually just going to keep doing the same thing you were doing anyway to beat projectile immunity, which is just following your fireballs with Kano. And when it hits, you deal extra damage. When they block, you forced a block and did chip damage. And when they do projectile immunity, Kano smacks them right out of it. Whereas with Striker or Sector, you have to commit to using a summon cameo where Shang Tsung is stuck in the animation in order to use a specific move to break projectile immunity, like Sector's teleport punch or Striker's cuffs. And all of this just ends up meaning that you don't have to adapt your game plan to your opponent as much. You have less on your mental stack when you're playing Kano than you do when you're playing other cameos. Other things that Kano Ball beats, it beats Viltrumite Stance, even if it's EX. So normally EX Viltrumite Stance beats even physical moves, but because Kano is airborne when he's doing it, EX Viltrumite Stance gets hit by Kano Ball. It makes the Omni-Man matchup go from a matchup that Shang would struggle with a lot to a matchup that is incredibly favorable for Shang. There's pretty much nothing he can do at full screen. Anyway, that's the video. That's my summary of why you should choose Kano and how to use Kano when you're playing as Shang Tsung. So give me a like, a comment, a subscribe, a pound of flesh, your inheritance, your firstborn child, and anything else you'd like to give me.